What's up, guys, and welcome back to the infamous project. We are wrapping up Justin's 1990 Atomic Fox, aka the Black Notch project. And while we're not really wrapping up the entire project here, we are wrapping up some of the post-startup items that you do once you've got your motor to fire for the first time and trying to get things ready for the car to go over to Walker Pro Performance down in Austin to get the titanium exhaust all welded up. And then most importantly in this car's case, the discharge pipe that's coming out of the YSI into that massive, I believe, 105 millimeter throttle body. And of course, getting that huge blow-off valve situated and finding a home for some of this stuff. So let the experts do what the experts do, because Walker Pro does some amazing welding and fabrication work, and better than I could ever do. Well, not to say I couldn't get there one day, but they're definitely making better use of their time. So with that said, I have been going through my checklist to make sure, well, fingers crossed at least, I want this car to be able to run, stop, and move under its own power, really. So run, drive, stop. And we know it runs. We don't know if it drives yet. And I've been going through the brake system. So in the rear, not too much changed other than adding the Taurus rear calipers. There was already Cobra brakes in the rear, so I only had to change the actual caliper portion itself right here. Didn't even need to touch the bracket, which was really nice. And then in the front, of course, we added the Cadillac ATS Brembos. And up here, these were done powder coated by Tom Clark, aka Built. He already put the S&S bushings in the back, so all I pretty much had to do was, well, put the little spacer plate behind the rotor and bolt the calipers on. Because again, this car had SN95 Cobra style calipers, so it already had the braided brake lines and everything else. So I did go ahead and locate a set of factory brake line brackets, since the ones that were on this car went missing at some point. I think whoever put the Cobra brakes on before thought there wasn't enough clearance from some of the suspension, or maybe whoever put the suspension on thought that there wasn't enough clearance. But anyways, we got that working. So brakes, I'm just waiting for Jerry to show up so he can help me bleed the system out. And that way, hopefully, we'll be stopping. Of course, I did bend up some new line in the front. I simplified things. I deleted the proportioning valve, the factory one. Not just, it was already gutted, but with the Taurus rear calipers in the back, we have the perfect brake bias. So just, it's that whole principle that less is more. So if you guys remember, and I'm still working on the final routing and cleaning stuff up here, I'll be getting this all in some loom and hidden out of the way. But I ran not only the passenger side caliper down in the front here, I ran the line that's going to the rear brakes. You can see it's actually hiding up here. Looks nice and clean when it's in the loom. That way you can't even really tell it's there. Then of course we have our junction block there going to the back of the car. Pretty much it for the brakes. Now, in terms of the car being able to move underneath its own power, super important to make sure that all the suspension and everything else is all tightened up, because I did have the rear diff out of the car when we painted the floor. So I've been going through and I pulled up Maximum Motorsports installation instructions for the torque arm. I just wanted to make sure that I had everything situated where it needed to be and the right torque specs for all of the hardware that is used to bolt this guy in, because that's really important. Sometimes if you don't know, you should check the instructions. So I've got everything pretty much 33 foot-pounds in most of these nylocks. I believe 47 on these guys underneath here. And of course did the control arms and all that good stuff. Upon closer inspection, you will see a nice aluminum drive shaft here. and that is courtesy of PST out of Florida. And I gave him the measurements, said, hey, I got TKX, I got an 8.8 in the rear, I've got 50 inches between the pinion flange and the back input of the transmission, and they sent me this beautiful piece. Of course, got the strange yoke there, and opted for the nicer hardware here, so things are nice and shiny and good. So one thing that is really important, and Maxim Motorsports stresses this in their installation instructions for all of the torque arm and everything else, and it's just good measure or good practice to do, is to check your angles. So your pinion angle, looking at the angle on the output of your transmission. So as you can see here, I got this little magnetic angle finder, and if we put that on the back of the tail shaft of the tail of the transmission here and hold it straight, we're at 2.90, 2.85, and we're under 3, which is pretty much the rule of thumb. And then same thing, right? So if you held this on your, now the drive shaft's already in, but if we held it kind of on the back here, and oh, of course we don't have weight on the suspension, so it's 3.35 right here. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was like 2.65 or something like that. So yeah, you always have to, you want to make sure that you got your weight on your suspension and everything else, so you take accurate measurements. So I got that stuff done. And hydraulics, more hydraulics. So you can see here, I got the lines coming out for the McLeod hydraulic throw-up bearing. And I got the bleeder sitting down here. And once Jerry is here, we'll do a little bit of a bleeding process. And you want to make sure that your lines are tucked out of the way and that there's no way for them to rub on anything. They also recommend, right, slitting some rubber hose and sliding it over your lines just to make sure that, you know, this stuff doesn't end up rubbing up there. But the reality is things should stay in place if you've got everything installed correctly. And I did find the tech sheet, and all of the tolerances were within spec for that throw-up bearing, which is good because I really didn't want to have to pull the transmission out again to find out the hard way. But even if we have to, it's not the end of the world. We got 4 bolts and, well, the drive shaft. So I still need to get fluid in the transmission. I'm going to make sure that the throw-up bearing's doing what it needs to do. Once that's validated, I'm going to top up the transmission fluid, and then I will get Loctite on the drive shaft bolts and get all of that tightened up in the spec. So that's pretty much it for now in terms of the underside of the car and getting the thing to run, drive, and stop. And I've been cleaning up some wiring, so I got final, you know, fuel pump relay and ground stuff all situated in the trunk there, so that's done. All right, guys, so moving on to the front end of the car here, there is something that I've been meaning to address ever since I had the car jacked up for the first time and looking a little more closely at the suspension. Now, this car does have a Maxim Motorsport K-member in it with the full coilover setup, bump steer, etc., etc. Now, upon closer inspection, I noticed that there was a few things that might have explained Justin's frustrations when he was driving at reasonable speeds on the highway, hitting bumps, and he said that there was just a lack of stability in some cases, which if you got the full Maximum Motorsport kit on your Fox, the last thing that you're going to want to feel is a lack of stability. Like, it shouldn't exist. So let's take a closer look here. Now, I haven't gone through the whole installation instruction manual for this kit. However, there's a few things that I want to point out, and you guys will probably get what I'm throwing down pretty quick. Now, the first thing is you can actually mount these control arms in 2 different positions, a little bit higher and a little bit lower. And this is how they were bolted in the car before I got it, right? Same thing goes for the steering rack. You can bolt it higher versus lower. So the consensus here is that when you're running the SN95 spindles that are 94, 95, you will typically run the rack up in the higher position. And by doing so, it allows your tie rod angle and alignments to be more in favor of things. So if we look at the tie rod ends here, you can see that these are nowhere near being parallel with the lower control arm. And that's sort of the rule of thumb. You want this to be on the same angle as your control arm. You can see that this spacer should actually have been mounted up here. And I have a feeling there probably was more hardware in this kit, but needless to say, there isn't enough room with this hardware to get this straight here. I've already gone over to this side, and you can see now we actually have quite a bit of hardware here and a much longer bolt that allowed us to achieve a pretty much nice and straight line with that lower control arm. So I'm going to do the same over here and get this swapped out, get the right amount of spacers in, and get that flush. So there's that component. And ironically enough, I feel like these control arms probably shouldn't have been bolted up in the top mount here. They probably should have been down here, but now that we've done the K-member spacer and spaced the K-member down, I feel like the geometry now works better in terms of trying to maintain factory geometry now that we've moved that lower control arm up, helping compensate for having pushed the whole K-member down. So the only thing that I'm going to double check here is the rack. Go to the lower hole. Lines are going to get really close to the oil pan and might make clearances a little bit tighter. I could be wrong here, but I think I'm right. And I think that the recommendation the Maximum Motorsport says when you use their front end kits is to actually use 96 and above style spindles, because they actually will help avoid all of this here in terms of the spacing. And the main reason with those style spindles from 96 and above is instead of having this curve that comes up here like this, it comes straight across. So imagine if this came straight across, we would probably be able to delete this spacer or collar that's right here. So now we've had to make up for this whole room here. Now the advantage or disadvantage, depending how you're looking at running the 94-95 spindles, is that it's the closest thing to maintaining stock track width. So it's actually, I believe, 3 millimeters worth of more poke over your factory spindle setup that would have come with your 4-bolt. And a 96-98 is actually going to push out 9 millimeters. So it's actually like running a spacer just by bolting on that newer style spindle. Now, depending what your wheel setup is, if you're running 94-95 style spindles and you're running a 5 millimeter spacer up here, well, if you swap your spindle out, you wouldn't need the spacer anymore. So that can be the advantage. Or maybe the offset of your wheel is too aggressive and you need more inward offset to help compensate, then of course this is the style that you're going to want to go with. There's a little bit of front end geometry and suspension isms, if you will. I'm going to go ahead now and get this tie rod / bump steer situation sorted out. This will most likely affect the toe of the car, so I'll have to get the quick trick on it after this is done. But I feel like between these few adjustments, Justin's car is going to handle that much better going over those bumps and at speed. So just like that, car is back down on the ground, and I don't know, probably a couple days this week, just going through and tidying up things. We got the right K-member bolts installed now, so we've got the extra length since we added those spacers. So you can see there's actually lots of threads coming up through those nylocks down there, grade 10 hardware. I actually wiped the car down since it's getting ready to go to the fab shop for the exhaust and the discharge pipe and everything else. I finished up a little bit more wiring, so we got the turn signals integrated into the Holley screen and the fuel sending unit. If you guys don't know how to do that, I've actually got another video where I go through how to configure those settings. It was on a white notch. So got a shifter installed. There's still a couple loose wires here and there as we're gonna have to finalize some things. But now is the moment of truth, because I have not yet tested to see if this car would move under its own power, since we bled out the McLeod hydraulic throw-up bearing, and also haven't tested the brakes, since we bled out the brakes and changed all of the calipers around and run some new lines. So this is going to be the test. Going to see, you know, this car, I fired it up yesterday, did a heat cycle on it just to make sure that everything was doing what it's supposed to do, and the fan output wires for the relays to kick fan 1, fan 2 on, and everything else, just to make sure that that was all working. Last thing we need is for things to overheat, and everything seemed good. So the car should start up, run, hopefully engage, and stop. And if it does, I'm gonna get the car outside in the cul-de-sac to take a couple pictures. Just the seat bottom, as it sure beats sitting on a milk crate. But it's not that far off, because there's nothing to hold you back. Runs, drives, stop. Well, that's going to conclude this video. Just going to go off to the fabrication shop, get some exhaust on it, quiet it down. If that discharge shoots the next time you hear this car, you're going to be able to hear that YSI blower. So stay tuned.